welcome everyone from the comfort of our own homes to the comfort of your own home in this most unusual time in human history. We're welcoming you to what I believe is the final session of the first day of the Geneva Peace Week. And I would like to welcome you on behalf of the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but also the co-organizer of today's panel, International Labour Organization, who have managed to secure this panel through their great presentation and allow us the opportunity to discuss what I believe is one of the more interesting topics that is facing the world of refugee responses. I would like to begin maybe by introducing the project that we will be discussing as well as the topic, and that's we're here to discuss prospects, but we're not really here to discuss only prospects. Prospects is a project and a partnership that we have facilitated from the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but which is implemented by our 5 partners, whom you will see as represented by their panelists later on. The prospect is an answer, we believe, or an attempt to offer an operational answer to the question of how to bring together humanitarian and development interventions or approaches to responding to protracted displacement. We have 80 million people currently displaced, and we also have, on top of that, massive challenges which are caused by the COVID pandemic. Having this project has been, I have to say, started a little bit before the pandemic, so we have been trying to adapt, and we have been assisted in that, as I said, by our 5 partners: UNHCR, UNICEF, the International Financial Cooperation, and certainly the sister organization World Bank, and certainly last but not least ILO, which I said is co-hosting and co-organizing this time. We have tried to we're trying to find ways to respond on 3 particular technical pillars, which is protection, including social protection, livelihood, and education. At the same time, this being Geneva Peace Week, we are obviously also interested in how, not just in trying to find new ways of working around these big organizations, trying to operationalize and implement the humanitarian development joint approaches, but we're also trying to find ways in which we can do that in a way that maybe we do not do direct peace interventions. Of course, we are, as they call us, the access project and partnership, but we are also fully aware that we live and we work in communities which have been facing social cohesion issues prior to our arrival, so to say, as a project and partnership, and will continue facing. And we're trying to find ways to also assist with basically improving social cohesion, or at least as a minimum doing no harm as we do our interventions. As you can imagine, arrival of massive amounts of people does affect labor markets, affects education, affects services, and can have quite detrimental consequences in social fabric. We will be discussing that, and I would like to also encourage you to ask all those questions and to think with us about ways in which we can make our interventions and how we can improve our interventions in terms of their responsiveness to the challenges of social cohesion. Please in the future, as we will continue, we will have a Q&A session at the end, and I would really like to encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A session window to the right. That is on your screen. That will be the way in which we will do. Of course, only have 25 minutes for your questions. We will try to group them accordingly and try to answer the most pertinent ones. And at the same time, as I said, I really encourage you to be critical and to think with us and to help us maybe identify gaps, new ways of doing things, new interventions. The way we can continue improving our work. But first, I would like to invite our 5 panelists to tell their stories from their own specific intervention angles, and also the story, I think, an exciting story about how these 5 organizations work together, perhaps for the first time on really joint projects, in very concrete 8 countries in the world where we are implementing this project. And without further ado, I will introduce them. And our first panelist today will be our distinguished co-host. It will be Christine Stermoser, the Special Advisor to the Deputy Director General for Policy of the ILO. Then we will have Mr. Michel Botung, Manager of Fragile and Conflict-Affected Situations from the African unit of the IFC. Joining us from the sister organization of the IFC, the World Bank, is Laila Hanafi, who is Program Manager of the Prospects Partnership. And finally, and who is attached to then a part of the Forces of the Fragility, Conflict, and Violence and Forced Displacement Unit within the World Bank. On behalf of the UNHCR, will be Mr. Alessio Baldacchini, who is Associate Education Officer. And finally, on behalf of UNICEF, currently not present, but she will join us any minute, is Zarina Knaus, Chief of Migration and Displacement. So without further ado, I would like to actually begin with Christina Stermoser. And a question is, ILO has been working on basically promoting cohesion and social coexistence and good social coexistence through decent labor interventions for decades now. But you have now started recently facing that and doing that also within the situations of protracted displacement, which require, and also in a very, I would say, challenging environment sometimes, when entry of refugees to labor market is both quite desired, but at the same time presents a whole range of challenges. And now you've been doing, on top of that, you've been doing this all in this wonderful company of these these other 4 organizations, with our supporting facilitation. And I'm really curious to hear, and I forgot, there's also a global pandemic on top of all that. So just to make the situation a little bit more complex. And I would really like to invite you to share with us your experiences. I understand your presentation will be about more global experiences of the ILO in responding to these challenges. So floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna, and good evening everywhere. And also let me acknowledge the partnership, all the colleagues who are here from other agencies together with us tonight, together with the Dutch, to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. So yes, we are clearly dealing with a situation of multiple and complex crises these days. Populations living in countries that we before March thought of as being fragile and conflictual now also struggle with the COVID-19 pandemic. And that has clearly exacerbated the challenges and the specific vulnerabilities that both host communities and forcibly displaced persons face. And this program, Anna, as you mentioned, is operational through this partnership in 8 countries. And at the end of my small intervention, I will highlight a few concrete examples that the ILO is working on. But before I address these serious challenges, I'll just say a few words about the organization that I represent in this panel discussion. It may not be that everyone who's listening in is fully familiar with the ILO, the International Labour Organization. In brief, this organization sets international labor standards, promotes rights at work, encourages decent employment opportunities, enhances social protection, and strengthens dialogue on work-related issues. So these are 4 pillars, as we say, of the decent work agenda. We do this through a tripartite structure consisting of employers and workers and governments at the international level. When I use the concept of decent work this evening, it is exactly referring to these 4 elements in an integrated way. And the standards, employment, social dialogue, and social protection. But if I should, in a more simplistic manner, say what we are talking about when we're talking about decent work for host communities and forcibly displaced persons, the issue is that it is never a matter of promoting jobs alone, but it is always a matter of promoting decent jobs or jobs with quality. So that is one of the things I just thought I should clarify, because many people will ask, what do we mean by that? Now, returning to the serious challenges around the world of multiple and complex crises. So we aim to promote inclusive employment and decent work approaches that can create economic opportunities that in turn can mitigate impacts on local resources. Our aim is to mainstream social cohesion throughout the Prospects program. And as you said, Anna, we have started off on this journey based on several years of research and analytics together with other agencies, by the way, which I think is important. It's something that we're not trying to do on our own. It will only really have an impact if we do this together. And we do that using specific conflict-sensitive, inclusive and rights-based approaches. And I'm going to speak about how this is happening. The policy framework, which is part of the guidance for this work, and it was endorsed by the ILO's governing body in 2016 to respond to crisis situations, including forced displacement, is a guiding principle. It's called the Guiding Principles on the Access of Refugees and Other Forcibly Displaced Persons to the Labour Market. And in 2017, the ILO constituents also adopted another very important standard, that is the Employment and Decent Work for Peace and Resilience recommendation. It has number 205. And that particular recommendation provides a normative framework that focuses on the world of work related measures to prevent and respond to effects of crisis caused by conflict or natural disaster. Now, the local communities that host refugees, it's very important when we are, and I think the approach, the dual approach of the project, targeting both host communities as well as refugee populations is very critical for us to succeed on any attempt to promote social cohesion. And the local communities that host refugees, they face similar challenges in this complex crisis. And if we are not careful in the way we design and implement the interventions, it could even have some more harming effect. You mentioned do no harm, Anna, at the beginning, and I'll return to that. There's no doubt that when refugees are coming into local communities, hate and concerns and potential tensions are often what we see. Now, the pandemic, as we have seen, further has a potential to ignite or further deepen those drivers that are conflict drivers, such as grievances, discrimination, mistrust, and sense of injustice, especially over access to health services, decent jobs and livelihoods. Many people are losing their job, and the competition for getting a livelihood to go through these times is very harsh, as we know, and thereby it will undermine progress on development efforts and social cohesion. We also are witnessing right now that epidemics and economic crises have a disproportionate impact on certain disadvantaged segments of the population, leading to increasing inequalities. And I think that's something that deserves much more discussion and much more time for discussion than we have tonight. But it's another sign of severe threat to social cohesion. Now, therefore, in responding to the socioeconomic impact of the crisis, the ILO highlights the importance of respect for and the promotion and realization of fundamental principles and rights at work, and other relevant international labor standards, and human rights more broadly. And human dignity is central to this work. For refugees, the opportunity to access decent work is fundamental to their protection and well-being, but also to restore their human dignity and their sense of purpose in life. Being able to access employment, to maintain and to expand their skills and find a decent job is integral to the restoration of human dignity and to strengthen resilience. So important to our discussion here today, having a job is also contributing to greater, more meaningful interaction between refugees and host communities, helping foster a climate of trust and peaceful coexistence. However, and here comes my key message, Employment and decent work interventions will not automatically promote social cohesion. And that's why it's so important to have this discussion today. Because while there are well-established theories on the link between employment, economic development, and social cohesion, empirical evidence remains scarce, and effective interventions need to build on an analysis of prevalent drivers of violence and conflict in a given context. So the major challenge we face is moving from anecdotal to more robust and measurable evidence that shows how decent employment and livelihoods can be those vehicles that factually strengthen social cohesion between communities affected by forced displacement. Therefore, analysis and research done jointly with other agencies has led us to the identification of some key contributing factors that we need to always have a focus on when we are dealing with designing these programs. Employment and decent work interventions for these populations can contribute to social cohesion if they, number one, actually address a factor that is a significant driver of conflict in a given context, and secondly, are conflict sensitive in the design and implementation, and that means, for example, that the design is informed by research on root causes of the conflict and other things. And thirdly, that they are adapted to local realities, which means using anthropological and similar research. In the absence of a conflict-sensitive approach, and this is where the potential harm come into picture, particularly in this time of COVID-19, the international response risks exacerbating conflicts, particularly in countries already affected by conflict or societal disharmonies. And importantly, may miss out on critical inclusive opportunities in the context of the pandemic. Now, to respond to those challenges, we are currently working with our country teams and partners in the 8 countries under this particular program. For example, in Ethiopia, in partnership with the Minister of Peace and the international NGO Interpeace, we are currently conducting participatory conflict and social cohesion analysis and diagnostics that will identify innovative initiatives and scenario or different suggestions to how conflict drivers can be addressed and promote social cohesion. So, and we are also looking at the development of key social indicators and baselines for different kinds of programs to monitor and document the impacts on social cohesion of different employment and livelihoods initiatives. So program design is informed, including the creation of economic opportunities, mitigating impacts on local resources, promoting contact between displaced and host communities, and reducing grievances. That's the aim of these designs. In summary, let me just say that social cohesion indicators and baselines are crucial. And without that, we will not be able to, in a credible manner, tell the story about social cohesion resulting from any development interventions. If I have 2 more minutes, Anna, I have 3 small examples. The first relates to skills development. Here, the ILO skills team has developed a set of specific modules on conflict management and social cohesion skills that are now going to be systematically included in vocational training curricula for young women and men from forcibly displaced and host communities. And the goal is to increase the ability of the TVET setup, the technical and vocational education and training, to contribute to social cohesion in a deliberate manner. And this intervention not only enhances employability for a group in high demand, but it also reinforces intergroup relations that may have been strained. So looking at conflict-sensitive ways of designing as well as organizing the training includes offering joint training to different groups. This is something we are currently piloting in Ethiopia, Sudan, Uganda, and Kenya. Secondly, and this example relates to small enterprise support, the ILO has promoted joint small enterprise ventures and cooperatives in Jordan and Lebanon between Syrian refugees and host communities, with a specific focus on women. And the aim is to foster and improve relations, reducing negative perceptions among communities, and empower women as income earners. And of course, this has the added value of reducing gender stereotypes, another key aspect of program design. But it's first and foremost a very interesting way of combining different skills and competencies across ethnic and social groups. And some of the projects we visited in Lebanon last year evidently showed a very strong business concept, a viable business concept, but also an evidently high degree of trust and dignity of labor. Finally, and part of the dignity of labor, by the way, is that these women had voice, and they were very proud, and they were clearly respected by the male members of their small community. Finally, the third example I would like to give from our side is the ILO's employment-intensive investment programs that address short-term needs of refugees, IDPs, as well as host communities, and creates the environment for development in rural or marginalized areas. Short-term emergency public work scheme contributes to mitigate the socioeconomic impact of COVID-19 crisis by creating immediate job opportunities. And I have to say that this we have repurposed a lot of our employment-intensive investment programs over the last 6 months, not only in relation to Prospect, and this has really made a big difference for people who were facing acute starvation. So we have contributed to building the bridge between the humanitarian and development in that aspect. Now, the aim for the programs is for the program to maintain productivity for the construction industry while contributing to longer-term development and social cohesion. And these programs undertake careful targeting, underpinned by conflict sensitivity considerations, and such schemes hire vulnerable and excluded groups and favor possibility for intergroup interactions, while selecting participants from displaced and host communities. This is something we have, this very specific targeting is something we have started recently. So we will see how it goes. It's not, it has a lot of challenges in it. Many women in some of these countries, for example, cannot work in the streets for social cultural reasons, as we know. But many countries have, the fact that many countries have seen major setbacks in their development over the last 6 months, we believe that programs like this one is critical to identify the more strategic investment areas that establishes a fundament that has the potential for building back better as these communities move out of the COVID-19 crisis. And finally, I think, let me just end here by saying that we hope that through Prospects, in close collaboration with all our partners in this program, we hope that we will all succeed in promoting conflict-sensitive approaches so that our programs over time will also, in addition to the immediate objectives, will also foster tolerance, address misunderstandings and misperceptions that may give rise to social unrest, and hopefully also that we can tell the story in a credible manner, taking all these points on board. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you very much, Tina. Thank you for this elaborate and for explanation of the more global approach and the challenges that you're facing, and also on your analytical work, but also for these 3 very concrete cases. And we're now going to dive into the other presentations a little bit more in very concrete cases. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about them. And I would just like to basically encourage everybody to stay within the time limitations, because we would like really to talk to our audience as much as possible, because our audience will give us inspiration and will give us critical questions that we really need at this moment. Tina, I'm taking from your presentation one incredibly interesting note, and that is about the necessity of indicators for social cohesion. Let us perhaps hopefully we will return to that in other, or be reflected in other colleagues. That will be very interesting to understand what it is and how we measure it so that we can improve it. What are the tangible ways in which we can capture that very elusive concept? But I would now like to go back to very concrete and operational reality. Livelihoods come in several ways. Jobs are one, but private entrepreneurship is another one, and sometimes even culturally quite, in many of the countries in which we are operating, culturally quite strong and very present way of ensuring livelihoods. And I would really like, and our big partner in this, of course, is IFC. And I would really like to now encourage Michelle and invite Michelle to tell us the story of the way in which IFC has been doing working in Prospect in specific Kakuma camp and the experience, and how have you been coping with the pandemic, and also how have you been managing to achieve social cohesion? Michelle, over to you.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity and thanks for organizing this panel discussion. So I'm working for the IFC. I'm based in Nairobi, and the IFC is the private sector arm of the World Bank Group. So what we do is that we invest in private companies across the world. So the refugee space or forced displacement space is not really an area we are very familiar with. It's actually a very new area where we are cautiously looking into. And it's not something that we have decided to do because we see big market opportunities. It's actually our humanitarian partners, and in particular the UNHCR, who has been talking to us and pulling us into looking at that dimension. So I will more specifically talk about the Kakuma example, which is here in Kenya, in northern Kenya. But I think the principles that we have applied to the intervention in Kakuma are probably principles that are relevant across the board in all the refugee or forced displacement interventions that we are trying to design. I think that we may have a chance to talk about that later, but I think the tailoring of the approach to a specific context is absolutely key. So I would not advertise or encourage people to replicate what we do in Kakuma, but I think the principles that are being applied are probably relevant everywhere. So for the ones of you who are not familiar with Kakuma, it's you have to imagine in northern Kenya, in a quite remote area, in a quite destitute area, in a quite arid area, the existence for a long time. I think the first camp for refugees there has been created in 1992, 1994. So more than 25 years of a protracted refugee situation that has actually triggered the creation and the emergence of a small town hosting local population. So you have to imagine that it's in one of the poorest and most remote areas of Kenya. And that's the area where we have been looking at for our specific intervention, which is supported and enabled by Prospects, which I think is a great initiative to put together institutions who are not used to work together, but also by other development partners. So what are we doing there in that destitute, refugee populated area? I think we are really doing two things. Social cohesion is not necessarily the key focus and the key objective of the intervention, but we are expecting and assuming that it would be an indirect outcome of the intervention. So the first thing that we do is to change the approach and apply what we would call in our jargon a market-based approach. So I guess probably for the first time ever, someone somewhere is applying to a refugee situation a market-based approach. So what does it mean? It means that we are not looking at refugees or host communities separately. We are looking at urban population, poor, dynamic, in operating in largely informal sector, but we are looking at them together as one single urban population. And I think that's a major change of approach. And I think it matters because although the population of that area is about, it fluctuates, but it's about 240, 250, 260,000 people, with about 180, 190 in the refugee camps and the 60,000 in the local population in the small city. If you look at it in a fragmented way, I think there's no obvious economic potential. You have on the one side the camps, which are largely relying on a humanitarian economy, services being provided from a care and maintenance perspective, mostly by NGOs and humanitarian actors, to a population who accepts them. And on the other side, I would say on the other side of the fence, to some extent, you have the local population who is watching that and benefiting from a little bit of the opportunities. But the two populations are very separate on the one side. And for private sector operators, in a country like Kenya, which has a very vibrant private sector in many sectors, a lot of innovations, where you would not be able to come across a 250,000 location city of 250,000 people without seeing a lot of services being provided, the presence of banks, microfinance, insurance, mobile money, retail, a lot of businesses. You don't see that in that area. And you don't see it because it's being perceived as refugees on the one side and host population on the other side. But if you merge the two, then our key assumption is that then you have a potential market opportunity that may trigger the interest and the investment of the vibrant private sector that you know in the rest of the country. So I think that's really the first angle. Moving from a purely humanitarian approach, which segments host population and refugee to some extent, towards a market-based approach and look at that population as a consumer opportunity for companies. It's a bit provocative, but I think that's one of the key principles. The second one, beyond that market-based approach, is really looking at trying to offer and generate joint opportunities for the refugees and hosts. So not a program that is targeting one against the other, but a program targeting both of them. What we are trying to do through the establishment and the rollout of a business challenge is really to provide opportunity for host community and refugee-based small businesses to benefit from additional financing, additional opportunity to grow their businesses, more capacity building, and market opportunities. So on the one side, attracting through business challenges companies that are based in other parts of Kenya to start serving that population, which is today to a large extent underserved, and then on the other side to provide opportunities for refugees and host population. Because our assumption is that they can both be entrepreneurs, suppliers, distributors, employees, so just normal people, and that's not what is happening today. Because I think if you look at it from a purely refugee-based approach, I think that the level of entrepreneurship that we see being present in that situation is totally constrained. Refugee-managed businesses don't have access to finance, don't have access to insurance, don't really have access to a lot of capacity building, while they demonstrate a lot of entrepreneurial spirit. And I think that's probably what needs to be, that those constraints need to be removed, and we are working with the local government at actually enabling a more plain level field. So in terms of principles, those are really the two things we are trying to enable: change the approach from a purely humanitarian approach to a market-based approach and show the potential of that underserved area with a large population, the businesses present in the rest of the country. And then on the other side, more directly support the emergence of local businesses and the opening of businesses by the rest of the private sector in the country. So that's very clear, quite ambitious. Let me say a word about the conflict sensitivity, because I think it's a key element. One would be quite naive by thinking that by creating opportunities, we will directly generate or enable social cohesion. I think there's a big risk related to that. More opportunities, if they are perceived as being only available for a certain percent of the population, would probably trigger more conflict. So what we have been doing with the support of our partners is really deploying a conflict sensitivity approach. And in particular, we have done a conflict sensitive assessment to get a good sense of what are the local dynamics, what are the factors of fragility, what are the factors of conflict at play in the area. And we have been trying to come up with specific mitigation measures to limit the potential risk that the project is actually not by intention or not by design, but potentially re-emphasizing factors of tensions. We're also looking at how is that current dynamic impacting the project, and we are coming up with mitigation measures. I think while the model may be specific to Kakuma, with this based on business challenges that we are rolling out, I think the approach in terms of the market-based approach on the one side, which I think is something that is quite relevant, particularly in protracted refugee situations, and then on the other side, working at providing joint opportunities between host communities and refugees in the entrepreneurial space, or having them as economic actors is a key element. And the combination of the two is where we see a potential role for us, where our expertise can be properly leveraged. Well, let me stop there, but I'm very glad to address questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michel. This was fascinating. And of course, this is one of the biggest challenges that we are facing as partners on this, which is we're working with populations which are fundamentally vulnerable. These are populations, the persons of concerns, as the colleagues from the UNHCR rightfully and legally define them. And at the same time, they are also economic agents. They want to have economic agency and they want to exert their economic agency. And sometimes there are very difficult trade-offs between the protection and economic agency. And I would love if some of those questions that come through Q&A maybe help us think that through, and also how that affects social cohesion further. But so thank you very much for giving us this food for thought. And I would like to now, basically, this is a great segue to our UNHCR colleagues who are basically the mandated organization and when it comes to refugee protection. And I would really like to encourage them. Maybe, I know, Alessio, that your topic will be a little bit different because you want to give us, we're staying in the region, we're staying in the Horn of Africa. You'll give us an interesting example of social cohesion that you do through working with youth, with refugee youth. But if you could maybe just for 30 seconds reflect a little bit on that dilemma between protection and economic agency, that would be also quite interesting because I believe that's also something that UNHCR is a little bit working on and trying the circles that we're all trying to square. So over to you, and thank you.
Hello, good evening to everybody. Thank you for the question, and it's a pleasure to be on this panel tonight and reflect a bit on these very important topics. So the question you're asking is very difficult, and I don't think 30 seconds will be enough, probably not even 30 hours. But I just would like to stress again what Michel said in its intervention, and basically, just to reflect a bit on what is now the UNHCR approach, especially after the affirmation of the Global Compact on Refugees in 2018, is that this is exactly the let's say, new way of working on UNHCR. We are still mandated for refugees. Their protection is our core, let's say, business, our pillar. That's why we exist as an organization. But on the other end, we are really looking into how can we strengthen refugee self-reliance? How can we strengthen the host community that are welcoming refugees in their territories, in their villages? So I think this is exactly the way of seeing it, seeing it as a whole community, refugees and host community, always keeping in mind what are the refugees' particular needs of protection. Having said that, I will use the few minutes I have to try to bring a concrete examples of a peace building and social cohesion project that UNHCR is leading to empower refugees, youth from South Sudan in the eastern horn of Africa. So without entering into many details of the South Sudanese history, it is important to remind one thing, that the South Sudanese refugee crisis is a children and youth crisis. What does it mean? That of the 2.2 million of South Sudanese refugees in the region, 65% of them are under 18 years old. And it's a huge portion of the population if you think about it. And potentially, there are also a large cohort of change makers within their own society, both in the country that are hosting them and in the country of origin. But this is just an ideal situation because the reality they face it's quite different. And what we can see in countries such as Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, Sudan, is that the South Sudanese refugees communities, the youth population among them, constitute a disempowered population with limited access to education opportunity, to livelihood opportunities, and also with a very limited room to be part of the decision-making process that affect their lives and their future. So I have to say that as an organization, I joined quite recently UNHCR, but I have to say that as an organization, we took some steps over the past few years on the way we try to work with young people, the way we try to engage them and empower them. Despite this global strategy that is totally in line with the UN guidelines across different organizations and other agencies, again, we need to stress the fact that the South Sudanese remain one of the most underserved groups in the region and in the humanitarian response in the region. So in 2019, recognizing the situation and thanks also to the Prospect Partnership support, we conducted an in-depth research in 4 countries, and Ethiopia, Uganda, Kenya, and Sudan, to understand better what is the youth situation there and what are their peace-building needs. And the main findings of this research are the following. The first one is that the South Sudanese youth no longer have a shared cause outside their ethnic identity. It means that a South Sudanese identity doesn't exist any longer outside South Sudan. And it means that the only identity that drives their decision and way of interacting with their peers is their ethnicity. And this is a huge problem, as you can imagine. The second point is, as already mentioned, they suffer from a lack of educational and economic opportunities. And the third point, which is very relevant, is that South Sudanese youth in general display high levels of mental and psychosocial distress. So in this context, the ethnic, tribal, the clan identities are exploited to perpetuate cycles of violence and division, especially by elders and traditional leaders. So this is happening in all 4 countries that have been analyzed during the research, and these represent a major protection challenge and a major impediment to social cohesion and social economic well-being. So we came up as an organization with this regional program, so multi-country program to address these things. And there are 2 major components in the program. The first component is a contextualized conflict management and peace-building training, which will be rolled out in the 4 countries that are part of the program, both with refugees community and host community. And the idea of this training is that won't be a one-shot training, but we'll have trainers that will spend months and weeks and months within the refugees communities, with the youth, marginalized youth communities in camp, in settlement, in villages, to map together with them what are the conflicts within their community, who they recognize as leaders, what do they think is the best way to solve conflict, and so on. So the idea is to build among the young cohort of the young cohort of refugees that will be involved in this project, to develop among them conflict management skills. But it would be very naive to think that just a simple training and the possibility to have these skills will by itself develop social cohesion. The same way as Tina was mentioning before, we cannot think that just access to decent work will solve the situation and it's the key to social cohesion. So that's why the program has a comprehensive and multidimensional youth strategy. So it means that alongside this peace building training and conflict management training, we'll work in order to expand access to education opportunities, expand access to livelihoods opportunities, to mental health and psychosocial support. And in doing this is where the partnership, it's pivotal, partnership with agencies and organizations that have a long-standing experience on that. UNHCR is traditionally, and it is still a humanitarian organization. So we need to look and we need to seek to expertise where it is. So that's why the work with partners such as the World Bank, ILO, UNICEF will become pivotal. The other quick 4 aspects that I want to underline about this program, actually 5 aspects that are important to the success, hopefully the success of this program in the long term, are the following: is that despite being a regional program, it is important that there is a deep understanding of the local context. Each camp, each village, each country has its own context and its own problem regarding conflict within the refugees communities and between refugees community and host community. The second thing is it's also very, very important is that as organization, UNHCR needs to build, we need to build our own capacity to be better placed to engage with young people. And I mentioned this before, and this is very important. The third thing is that we don't need to reinvent the wheel again and again and again. There are plenty of local association, community-based organization, even individuals that are acting as peace builders at community level, and we need to make sure to include them in the implementation of this program. The fourth point is that the program is designed to be as much as engaging with youth as possible. It means that young people will be engaged in designing the content of the curriculum for peace building training, will be involved in designing activities and in monitoring them. And the 5th point is that the idea is that along the implementation of the program will have a robust evidence-based approach, collecting data all the way through, starting with the baseline we had with this research in 2019 and developing a monitoring system also to address the program in case we are going in the wrong direction. Well, just a very quick mention to the COVID-19 situation. Of course, it had an impact on the conflict, but as said, all the conflict were pre-existing, but the COVID-19 situation just exacerbated this kind of conflict because it's lower access to education, lower access to livelihoods, and also very, very simple things like social distancing. With the social distancing protocols, community meetings, religious gathering are no longer possible, and those were the 4-hour conflict were discussed and solved. If this is no longer possible, this is a problem. And what we experienced in the past 6 months is that this led to a recent escalation in violent clashes in several locations, especially in northern Uganda. So what we are now trying to do is that, of course, we are trying to migrate all our trainings to have a blended learning component, so in-presence and online component. But we need also to address and have a conflict assessment in the recent hotspot and to inform our response to what is happening now. So the idea, and I'm finishing here, is that through this multi-year program and its multidimensional approach combining different aspects, we will be able to build a stronger social cohesion between refugees communities, so within the refugees communities and between refugees and hosts across countries of asylum. So thank you very much. Sorry if I've been a bit long.
Thank you, Alessio. I find it very interesting what you said in the last moment that just how much COVID has impacted it, and I see that you have made, and I know that UNHCR has made great efforts to actually try to find its footing in new ways of responding to this, in continuing with your programming in these new circumstances. And I just wanted, and I see that there's a lot of questions coming from the audience around that, and I would. I hope that Verena from UNICEF is going to take, when it's her turn, she's going to basically take that on and continue that topic and perhaps answer some of these questions also coming from the audience. And at the same time, I would like us to try to stick to our times because that way we can hear the audience. And that would be quite, as I said, that would be quite useful, I think, for furthering our conversation. And talking about difficult contexts, and in terms of social cohesion, I would like to now give floor to Laila Hanafi from the World Bank, who's going to take us to a different region, to the MENA region, where social cohesion has been, I think, put under even higher pressure than if at all possible, than in the Horn of Africa, and to give us some of the examples of the cross-sectoral response that also includes and promotes social cohesion that the World Bank has been doing and has been doing within this particular partnership. Thank you, Laila.
Thank you, Anna. Thanks, everyone. So I'm Laila Hanafi with the World Bank, and I work with the FCV group, which is the Fragility, basically Conflict, Violence, and Forced Displacement group. And the Forced Displacement agenda sits with us. So thanks for the kind invitation to share with you very briefly some of the bank's contribution generally to social cohesion and displacement work, and specifically through the Prospects partnership. So if you allow me, I will quickly structure my points around first maybe prefacing this with a quick overview of how the bank tackles social cohesion in forced displacement settings generally, and then I can zoom into the Mashreq countries, examples of Jordan, Lebanon, and Iraq, and maybe collating some of them through the Prospects supported initiative, the Mashreq Displacement Response Framework, MDRF, which is a conceptual framework that Prospects partnership has supported, and which we're using right now as a filter, basically, for our work on forced displacement. And social cohesion is a cross-cutting theme, basically, through this framework. So maybe if I may just generally at the World Bank, in the context of forced displacement, social cohesion issues can be articulated along two dimensions. So within host communities and then between host communities and the forcibly displaced. And for those of you maybe who are not very much familiar with the bank's orientation, basically when it comes to social cohesion and forced displacement, I mean, so far it has been generally to ensure that effective steps are taken to identify, prevent, and mitigate social tensions and risks of violence between and within refugee and host communities. And of course, this is in alignment with global frameworks like the Global Compact on refugees. Basically, the bank's work has been at the policy level. We look at whether there are policies directly or indirectly aimed at identifying and preventing and mitigating potential social tensions and risks of violence in refugee hosting areas. And then more at the operational and programmatic level, we would usually look at whether there are local mechanisms which promote peaceful coexistence, dialogue, local participation, and basically a representation of both refugees and host communities. Maybe a quick, just last point on this general overview is that over the last 2 years or so, the bank has completed this global desk review of basically academic literature and practice to better understand how to target and design policy and operations for displaced persons in ways that do not exacerbate or exaggerate social tension. And one recommendation was that social cohesion should be identified at this contextual level and through a comprehensive programmatic response in which basically projects and project activities can make a contribution. So this is basically the premise. So when we take this forward through the MDRF, through the Mashreq Displacement Response Framework, which is this World Bank basically conceptual framework that is, that, like I've mentioned, that Prospects supported, and through which, again, social cohesion is really cross-cutting across the themes. The bank's thinking was really that given the complexities and the evolution of the displacement crisis in Mashraq countries, and here we've been looking at Iraq, Jordan, and Lebanon. Basically, the bank decided to embark on this framework with the main objectives to reduce poverty, so to stay obviously within its mandate, and of course address vulnerability of displaced populations and host communities. So in terms of social cohesion and how are we investing in social cohesion in the Mashraq countries and through the framework, maybe here I could put a disclaimer that when we use the term social cohesion in the MDRF, we are referring to social cohesion in broad terms for ease of terminology. But we are recognizing that in some contexts, such as Lebanon or in Jordan, social stability, peaceful coexistence are more appropriate terms, as some of our humanitarian partners in Prospects could describe the challenge. So obviously, I think, like you've mentioned, Anna, the Mashraq focus is obvious. There's a historical dimension, obviously, to social tension and instability in the Mashraq countries. And the tensions in these countries are driven by structural, social, and economic causes, and really proximate factors related to the displacement situation. And one of these issues actually is weak institutional capacity to deliver basic services. And if you combine that with the shock of mass displacement, then really this has the potential to exacerbate existing social, economic, political stresses. So the main example that I thought might be relevant for the discussion today is really the one relevant to local service delivery, as an example to share from the World Bank active portfolio in the Mashraq. And really global experience has shown us that local service delivery is best left to local governments, which are obviously closer to the community, and particularly when we're talking about a crisis situation, may be able to respond more effectively and in a timely manner. So basically, I think with this premise, social cohesion can be best engendered by host communities. The national governments may not fully recognize the emerging social tensions at the local level, making it really difficult for them to address these issues. So here, our experience is that local institutions and municipalities are really the first level responders to provide services for refugees and host communities. And the bank support has been focused on really strengthening their capacity to do so and to play a key role in responding to the crisis and preserving social cohesion. So this has been done through, especially through Lebanon and Jordan. Also, municipalities and governorates reportedly have a limited understanding of their role, and the lack of trust sometimes between municipalities, the national ministries, hampers effective cooperation and delivery of services. So again, municipal leaders in Jordan in particular had different views, for example, on what the role of a municipality should be. There was no consensus on whether their sole mandate is service delivery, or given the circumstances, they should also be involved in promoting local economic development, social cohesion. So the lack of trust means that stakeholders, both the host and the displaced, do not believe that maybe policy decisions are less likely to be taken by municipalities, and those taken would be less likely to respond to their needs. So the issues, I think, that are surrounding local service delivery has been one area where the bank has been building on its practices in the Mashraq and also in other parts of the world, and has accumulated extensive experience in responding to crises involving forced displacement. So really going forward, a scaled up, in a way, NDRF for local service delivery we realize needs to go beyond the business as usual model or emergency response, really to build social cohesion at the local level and focus at building the capacity at the local level. Another point, obviously, that we have also recognized in these three countries is really catalyzing the role of forcibly displaced women in social cohesion efforts because they can contribute to a more inclusive social contract. And women continue to be underrepresented at all levels of policy dialogue, humanitarian and development service delivery. So involving women in efforts through, for example, community-driven planning, World Bank design of operations, can directly increase women's access to improved livelihood, short to medium term. And this is also an area where we've been focusing on further, and also through the prospects phase that's coming up. So maybe I'll stop here, and I'll be more than happy to take questions that might emerge from the audience.
Thank you, Laila. And again, this is, I mean, I don't think that we will manage to discuss all of these interesting topics coming up, and the role of the local governance, which I also saw in Michelle's a little bit presentation come forward. Is again, it's really important to be working with those layers. Specifically in Mashraq, sometimes they're the only layers that one can actually constructively, operationally work with. So this is another very interesting aspect of this conversation. But what I'm also seeing, and I found it very interesting, is that there's a lot of questions coming up on the Q&A, specifically around how do you do it? Okay, these are nice stories, but how operationally do you do it? And I hope that we'll have time to discuss that at the end of this session, and maybe share some of these very practical operational experiences. And I think that this is also a great moment to give Verena the chance to tell how UNICEF is doing it, because this is possibly the most operational in a way, other than Michelle's story, that we have on today's panel about very concrete, very responsive. Maybe Alessia was also touching upon it. Responses to basically challenges of multiple challenges that are happening right now with very vulnerable group, the youth, and in a refugee context, but also in the context of pandemic and in the context of shifting gears from face-to-face context and face-to-face operations to more digital and remote operations, which remain challenging for us here as well. So, Verena, I would, without further ado, over to you.
Thank you so much, Anna. I hope you can hear me. This is all right. Okay, thank you so much. And you know, what a hard place to be in, to come after my fellow partners who have already covered so many of the critical issues. So let me maybe, as Anna, you threw the challenge at me to try to provide maybe some examples of the how to and the where and the why. And let me maybe, as you said, really zoom in a little bit on youth, and within youth, obviously on those that have already come up in many of the previous speakers, refugee youth in host communities that have received large influxes of refugee communities, migrant youth on the move, all those that are very often on the margin of societies or not necessarily included in the education system and the labor market, and very often end up coming from or living in places that are the places where you would least expect innovation, digitization, entrepreneurship. So let me maybe, zoom right into this and provoke all of us here, because obviously the countries that Prospects looks at and tries to support governments and partners on the ground in providing learning opportunities, earning opportunities, and by doing so, strengthen the social cohesion between hosting communities and refugee communities. These are not countries where you would naturally think of as particularly entrepreneurial. These are also not countries where you would naturally look for entrepreneurship, but these are the places where you find so much of this. And these are the places where, in particular, we have as UNICEF found a lot of inspiring young people who, against all odds, in these very challenging contexts, change their own communities, change their own lives. And obviously, in many cases, it starts with them getting access to education, them getting access to those opportunities to start with. Now, the starting point and the challenge is clear. We always approach anything we do in the context of prospects, in the context of our COVID response, on the premise that talent is universal, but opportunity is not. And refugee and migrant youth in particular, they represent a pool of untapped talent, or as we sometimes say, diamonds in the rough. We also know, and that's a challenge that we need to resolve together, that many digital innovations that exist out there are not very inclusive. On the contrary, the starting premise is that you have access to a mobile phone, access to Wi-Fi, access to connectivity. And so many of the marginal youth or refugee youth we are talking about here, they are not having access to digital connectivity as we would imagine. And so many of the digital hubs, they are really out of reach for them. And the next challenge, obviously, is that we know that out of the world's 1.3 billion youth, the majority, or 1 in 5, is neither in employment nor education and training. And then when you scrape that back and you look, so how does it look for refugee youth or youth in communities that have received large numbers of refugees? Well, there the situation is even more challenging. So many of the young people there, whether they have been on the move themselves or whether they have been living in their communities, they face limited access to education, training, and jobs. They face discrimination, exclusion from labor markets, from education system, training systems. Their education pathways, their CVs are disrupted. And in the case of refugees themselves, they're also cut off from social networks, where you would normally start with to actually restart or find your way, so to speak. Now, COVID has only made the situation more challenging for all of us. Already pre-COVID, refugee children were 5 times more likely to be out of school. Only 24% of refugees attended secondary school. And now post-COVID, the situation has aggravated. 99 countries closed their borders. Our own UNICEF teams reported back that in a majority of countries where we responded, we reported back an increase in tensions. Xenophobia was on the rise, discrimination was on the rise, specifically targeting populations on the move. And we also, in our own efforts to try and reach refugee populations, youth on the move, we found that providing especially remote learning was particularly challenging because of barriers related to connectivity, barriers related to access to reach, and opportunities. Now, what do we do? And obviously, as you said, Anna, we all acted, we all continued, we all reinvented our programs, and innovation in a way became not a choice anymore. It's a must now. We need to find ways to discover, leverage, and get to the talents that are residual among the youth on the move that we're speaking about, engage them, empower them, build their skills. Why? Because we owe it to them, but we also owe it to societies. I think Leila spoke about it, Michelle spoke about it. If you have an untapped pool of youth agency, of aspirations, of desire to learn, to earn, of family pressures to make a living, it's like a ticking time bomb. It's the opposite of social cohesion. So investing in education and learning and earning pathways, bringing people back on board by offering opportunities that are tailor-made to their context, tailor-made to where their education cut off, where they left off, and where they are now. This is the main investment we need to achieve social cohesion. So let me maybe just quickly share 2 examples of what we've tried to do, and obviously not alone, but with partners, and where we really need more partners to join in, and where Prospects, as a partnership that already involves 5 partners in 8 countries across the learning, earning, protection spectrum, where I think and we think Prospects can really make a huge contribution. First, globally as UNICEF, in the wake of COVID, we launched a Reimagine Education initiative. What is our vision? We want to actually connect 3.5 billion children and young people by 2030 to world-class digital solutions that offer personalized learning so that they're prepared for the future that comes. As part of this, we're working, of course, with the private sector to provide learning contents and platforms and content that actually is relevant to children and young people and in languages they understand, which particularly for refugee youth is key. We also tried, and we are mobilizing together with other partners that are linked up in the GIGA initiative, around 3 billion in public financing so that we can increase connectivity. Because without connectivity, remote learning, digital learning, whatever the content, is just not in reach for young people. This is the key investment we need to close the digital divide and to scale up digital learning as a complement to learning that happens in classrooms and on the job. We also obviously need the support of the private sector to lower the cost of digital devices so that really every child and young person has access to these devices, and get the mobile network operators to continue zero rating learning content so that digital learning content can actually be accessed by anyone everywhere. And then obviously key to this is also going to be the support of governments to scale up the digital infrastructure at every school, in every camp, in every place where refugees may find themselves. The second example I want to share, and I'm very excited because we just launched it today at the Youth at Heart Forum that the Ministry of the Netherlands convened today, bringing together, I think, more than 1,700 young people and decision makers from around the world. Today we decided to launch the Reimagine Your Future Challenge. What is it? It's basically an invitation and an opportunity for young people, in particular youth on the move, to join and to rethink their own future, to try to realign their aspirations and to guide them from their aspiration to action, to a plan, and to learning, micro-learning, tailor-made learning content, and a skills assessment that allows them to not just reimagine the future, but restart their future. This challenge is available to all young people and is launched also in Ethiopia, Kenya, Iraq, countries that are part of Prospects, and another 13 countries around the world, as well as being available globally. But what is it really? Challenge. You may think, okay, so what? Who cares? You participate, and then after thinking, actually the challenge, Reimagine Your Future, is an invitation to bring more young people into YOMA. And what is YOMA? YOMA is the Youth Agency Marketplace. What YOMA wants to do is basically offer an ecosystem where partners come together, and it's an open invitation to everyone who's listening to join YOMA. If you can offer jobs, if you can support with job placement, with mentorship, internships, educational learning content, you have to expect from the systems and whose education pathways have been disrupted. Online digital learning, of online opportunities for job matching, and it's offsetting the cost of education, which in so many cases is the biggest barrier for young people who are pressured to earn by their parents or who themselves need to make a living. It is offsetting the cost of education by providing tokens. So young people, as they learn, they can earn digital tokens, sort of a digital currency, that they can actually then spend on more learning content or actually trade off in their local markets in those countries where the partnerships with the private sector have been developed. So it's basically a gainful way of learning and rebuilding your CV, acquiring the skills you need for the future that you want to have. And I think the most interesting bit that I think is particularly relevant for our discussion today, there's also another way of earning these tokens, and that is by impacting your own community. By doing good in your own community, you can also redeem tokens. So if you actually initiate a social cohesion program, if you're providing peer learning support to your neighboring kids, if you're actually engaging in a social action that addresses maybe climate change in your community, this is another way to earn tokens, to earn an income that you can redeem online or in real life. So without further ado, I think our vision is big, but obviously we need many more partners to join. And we need to sort of keep the eye on the ball because the obstacles are great, as we all heard today. Local level, national level, international level, so much of it is stacked against achieving these sort of learning, earning pathways for young people out there. But I think if we get together, we can reach 20 million youth by 2020 through this YOMA network. And I think we can also actually connect more than 500,000 with job opportunities and really expand that ecosystem so that in the online world and in the real world, social cohesion is a reality for young people, and learning and earning is not just a dream, but a fact. Thank you.
Thank you, Marina. This is a very nice. I was about to throw a very challenging question. So, how do you see all these agencies working together, and then added value of you working together? And then suddenly there was this example of Yoma, where basically some of the key issues that we have covered until now have partially offered one of the very potentially concrete platforms for bringing these. Let's say, specific added values of each of your organizations together in facilitating a very comprehensive response, which is global and in its nature, so to say, because of its digital grounding. I am afraid that our time is up, and I'm very grateful for the panelists for having responding to questions. I know that a lot of questions that came have been actually answered through some of those interventions, some of those stories that we shared. And I'm also grateful specifically to panelists who have directly answered the questions to the people in the chat and in the Q&A. So thank you very much for that. Maybe if our host allows us, and the patience of our audience allows us for a concluding remark, and maybe a bit of a challenge turning to the group, I would like to me, this was a wonderful number of wonderful stories about how each of your agencies actually works, and what each of your agencies has contributed so far through the framework of Prospect. I would like you also in responding and adding to improving and potentially maybe hopefully transforming at some point responses to protracted displacement. And I would like maybe to challenge one of you, instead of me doing a concluding remark, I would like to challenge one of you to actually try in literally 2 minutes or maybe less to explain where do you see an actual potential, and how do you experience the potential of this particular partnership that we're currently building, and which brings together such variety of mandates, of know-how, of operational models, and just ways of thinking between market-based approach and mandated refugee protection, between working with children on the move and working with local governments as the World Bank does. Where do you see I'm basically looking for a volunteer to try to explain where do you, as representatives of your organizations, maybe I will give this to Tina because ILO brought us here, so maybe I think it is only fair that ILO maybe and tries to explain it from your organizational point of view. Where do you see the added value, and how can we move forward also in terms of social cohesion? Or what else? What would be the next 3 steps that we need to make to ensure that our programming is both effective, but also that it contributes to social cohesion? Over to you, Tina.
Thank you very much. Very brief. I mean, thanks to all the colleagues. It has been a very rich experience, and I think that is really something that we have to keep that momentum. I think we have to keep sharing those things, but identifying. When I listened to Michelle from IFC on the market-based approach, etc., I got immediately some ideas of the program team with Nick and others and the colleagues in IFC are working on that. But I see links between agencies, both 2 and 2, sometimes 3, on very specific concrete areas. And I know that a lot of it is happening at the country level. I like Marina's reimagining approach. I think we are in a space right now where we are not just repurposing, but maybe we are reimagining. And basically reimagining doesn't mean that we are throwing out all the program elements that the program has put in place, but it is really trying to look at it with fresh eyes. So I think one of the things, maybe number 2, is to use it as an opportunity, this crisis, and all the things we've been experimenting with, to look at our frameworks with fresh eyes and try to inject some of these crazy ideas. Not crazy in a negative sense, but sometimes it takes a push to come up with these, and then I will stop there and leave the space for others because I need more time to think. But I thought it was very, very interesting also. I mean, I could go on, but I shouldn't do that. I will privately message all the colleagues with my feedback. We can do that between us, I guess. Over.
Thank you. I would have loved to continue this, and I already know where I would have gone, but time is up, and we have been testing the patience of our audience. And I would like to. I'm thrilled to hear that you will continue these bilateral, and I encourage you trilateral, quadrilateral, please, with all 6 of us, 5 of us, to continue looking for joint ways or strategically aligned ways in which we can further transform some of these refugee responses, I hope. I want to thank you all for being here as panelists. I want to thank our audience for being here with us until what is almost 8 p.m. CET. And once again, thank ILO for bringing us here. Until, and I hope very soon, in those in-depth conversations. Thank you.
Thanks, bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks for the moderation, Anna. Bye, everyone.